Now you have the butcher of Bakhmut, Alexander Syrskyi. And as this literal figure who's responsible in Bakhmut for sacrificing many, many Ukrainian soldiers to the point where the Politico, this rag of the Western mainstream media, is reporting that Ukrainian soldiers are telling them they are FUCKED because of this guy coming in. He is now saying that Ukraine is changing its strategy. Breaking news. It is now only interested in holding the line. So, Scott, help us make sense of this situation, these contending but interrelated developments.
Well, first of all, let's talk about Zaluzhny. He's a popular general, popular amongst the Ukrainian forces and popular amongst the West. He was the face of Ukraine at the Ramstein Contact Group in Germany, where Ukraine would meet with NATO, European allies, and convince them to basically turn over $150+ billion worth of assistance, military assistance, equipment, training, money, etc. He was very good at what he did. He wasn't the battlefield commander. The battlefield commander was the commander of the ground forces. That was Syrskyi. So Zaluzhny's job was to create the conditions for a Ukrainian victory, to give Syrskyi the equipment, the manpower, etc., that he needed to prevail on the battlefield. Syrskyi has a mixed record. In 2014, he was the commander of the Ukrainian army. The Battle of, I'm going to butcher this, but Debaltseve or something of this nature in northern Donetsk, near the Donetsk-Lugansk border. Basically, a couple thousand Ukrainian soldiers got surrounded by the Russians in early 2015, late 2014, early 2015. Vladimir Putin has talked about this battle, and he said that the biggest mistake he made was not terminating the Ukrainian army at that point in time. He said, we could have done it. We had them. All we had to do is just finish the job, kill them all, and that would have been the end of the Ukrainian army, and that would have been the end of the problem of Donetsk and Lugansk. It would have solved itself. But France and Germany intervened. Hollande, the president of France, Merkel, the chancellor of Germany, came in and begged Putin not to allow this slaughter to take place. And so thus was born Minsk II. And Putin says he regrets this because the West clearly wasn't negotiating good faith, as Merkel and Hollande admit today. That was a sham. They were just buying time to rebuild the Ukrainian army to get in position to finish the job on Ukrainian terms. But Syrskyi was the commander there, and he got a reputation for being very aggressive and getting the Ukrainian armies, butt in a sling. He was too aggressive. Syrskyi was the ground commander for the defense of Kiev. I'm not going to denigrate him. He, clearly the Russians didn't take Kiev. I don't think Russians were trying to take Kiev. Russia was doing a political maneuver trying to get Ukraine to the negotiation table. So Syrskyi's accomplishments in Kiev, have to be taken with a grain of salt. Russia wasn't pushed back from Kiev. Russia voluntarily withdrew from Kiev as part of the terms of the discussion. Putin mentioned this in the interview. Syrskyi also was in command of the Kharkov offensive in the summer and fall of 2022, after the Ukrainian army had been rebuilt with $48 billion of U.S. Lend-Lease money, equipment, European equipment. And the Russian army had, again, withdrawn from large swaths of territory, and over 50% of their forces in the Kharkov region had likewise withdrawn to Russia for refitting. So the Ukrainians attacked. Maybe the Russians should have been better prepared, but Syrskyi was able to push the Russians out of Kharkov to their current defensive positions. But in doing so, he lost a lot of men. That 60,000 man army that NATO had built up was eviscerated, and they had to build the army up again. And then Syrskyi engaged in Bakhmut. Many people were saying, hey, just give the Russians Bakhmut, pull back to the high ground and dig in and save these lives. We need these lives for the summer counteroffensive. You know, the summer counteroffensive wasn't supposed to be 90,000, supposed to be at 160,000 troops, but 70,000 of them got butchered in Bakhmut by Syrskyi, both the defense of Bakhmut and then once Bakhmut fell, the continuous attacks to try and recapture it that cost tens of thousands of Ukrainian lives. Syrskyi is responsible for that. And Syrskyi, of course, was the ground forces commander for the failed counteroffensive. The name Butcher comes because he's very aggressive and he doesn't shy away from throwing away life. Zelensky liked Syrskyi. You see, one of the problems that Zelensky had with Zaluzhny was that in December of last year, Zaluzhny gave an interview with The Economist, I believe, where he said, look, we've reached a stalemate. And Zelensky's going, you can't use that word. It doesn't matter what reality is. My job is to go out and get nations to give us equipment. And they're only going to give us equipment if they think that by doing so, we can fulfill their fantasy of strategically defeating Russia, which requires us to be aggressive on the battlefield to inflict harm on Russia so Russia suffers losses so that there can be a political collapse of the Putin government. We need to be aggressive, aggressive, aggressive. And Zelensky's going, we can't. We don't have anything left. We've thrown it all away. We're done. We have to go. It's a stalemate and we need to go over on the defensive. And so, you know, Zelensky also viewed Zaluzhny as a political threat. Zaluzhny was saying, hey, maybe I could do a better job. There's some leaked conversations where Zaluzhny allegedly says some things about Zelensky that aren't very flattering, but he clearly has a low opinion of the Ukrainian president. And the rumor was that he believed he could do a better job. If there was going to be an election that there should have been in March, Zaluzhny might have beat Zelensky at the polls. So Zelensky's had his, the crosshairs on Zaluzhny for some time to get rid of him. And finally, he decided it was time to pull the trigger. Zaluzhny was no longer the general who was able to fulfill the vision set forth by Zelensky. This created a crisis because when he first tried to fire Zaluzhny said no. Now, in civil military relations in a democracy, when the civilian leadership tells the military, you're done, step aside, the only answer is, sir, yes, sir. We've seen this in American history. General McClellan thought he could fight the war better than Abraham Lincoln. But when Lincoln fired him, McClellan said, yes, sir, and he stood away. Douglas MacArthur thought he was a hell of a lot smarter than Harry Truman during the Korean War, wanted to have nuclear war against China. And Truman said, nope, you're fired. And MacArthur stepped aside. So now Zelensky has his vision of the war. Clearly, Zaluzhny doesn't agree with it. And Zelensky said, you're fired. And Zaluzhny said, no. Not only did he say no, then he went and brought in one of these senior Azov types, right sector guy, gave him a medal and took a picture in his office. Stepan Bandera's photograph behind him and the right sector flag. And the clear signal was, hey, these are the guys that I hang out with. And if you want to fire me, you're going to have to deal with these guys. And so there's a crisis. Victoria Nuland had to fly in and do a lot of work behind the scenes.
Give them some cookies, maybe. Yeah.
Hand out some cookies and pay. So, and at the end of the day, Zaluzhny stepped aside and Syrskyi came in. But what's interesting is, Syrskyi was saying, we're going to go on the immediate counteroffensive in Avdiivka to try and, push to stall the Russian attack. Well, today he says, no, we've gone over on the exact same strategy that Zaluzhny was saying that they needed to do. Syrskyi's now doing it because reality is reality. But the difference is, I think when Victoria Nuland engaged, I think there was a coming to minds between Zelensky and the Americans now about the direction this war is taking. I think even the Americans are telling Zelensky, hey, stop with the fantasy of achieving a battlefield victory. You can't. We got nothing left to give you. Hey, so let me tell you something, Zelensky. That money ain't coming out of Congress anytime soon. All right? I mean, even if Mike Johnson said, no, it's dead on arrival, the Democrats are saying, well, we're going to try a parliamentarian, maneuver. It takes 30 days to get to that point. In 30 days, Ukraine is going to lose 50 to 60,000 more men. They don't have anybody else coming in. Syrskyi is doing what Zaluzhny was saying he wanted to do, but now Zelensky supports it because Zelensky understands that he can't allow fantasy to govern his actions, that the reality of the battlefield has to match the political reality that he has to get his allies to accept the fact that the best thing Ukraine can hope for right now is a stalemate, the stalemate that Zelensky was articulating back in December. But the problem is, this isn't a stalemate, it's a rout. This is the collapse of the Ukrainian military, and there's nothing anybody can do to change it, which now brings us back to the earlier story that you had about Reuters. The Reuters article isn't about anything that Putin did. The Reuters article is about the panic within the West about how do we find an off-ramp. And they're putting ideas out there that are fantasy, but that what it's doing is it's creating the notion of a negotiated settlement. It's saying that this war won't end with Ukraine regaining its 1991 territories, pushing Russia out of Crimea. This war will end only through a negotiated settlement, and probably one that gives Russia all the territories that it currently possesses, and that the best bet Ukraine can have is to hope that by suing for peace early on, they get to retain the four that Vladimir Putin has indicated are part of the new Russia concept.
Yeah. And there's just, it's so interesting too, as you mentioned, Reuters again, and the reports of Putin reaching out. It's almost as if there's this broad recognition now, and especially in the United States as a political class, that this conflict isn't going the way that they imagined it would go. Or maybe I've thrown around the idea that maybe they didn't imagine it to go anywhere, any certain direction. There was hopes, maybe there were aspirations. However, there might have been an understanding among some in the blob of the foreign policy establishment that it's not so easy to take down Russia. And that then gets me thinking, well, okay, well, if you say Putin wants a peace deal, then one day, sometime in the near future, you say, we agreed. You can try to frame it as, oh, this was Putin's idea. Putin came to us. We didn't come to him. We were strong this whole time. And look, Ukraine did better than we imagined, because that's another narrative out there now. Ukraine has done better than we could have ever thought. Look at what they've been able to do. They've been able to hold the line. They've been able to push Russian forces back. Look at how strong Russia is compared to Ukraine, how big it is compared to Ukraine, and yet Ukraine stood up to Russia. That's another big narrative. So, on the other hand, though, you also have, various Western media publications, I believe Business Insider, the latest, saying things are really bad for Ukraine, and there really is no ceasefire or peace deal or anything in sight. So, Scott, could you just delineate a little bit what actually is happening right now on the battlefield? I know Avdiivka is really where everyone's eyes are, but at the same time, I know that there's a broader situation that this all points to.
Look, the way this war was, the positional war, one of the things that made it difficult is the weaponry that both sides have, the precision artillery, the drones, etc., make it difficult to mass your forces. And so the battlefield is defined by a series of small unit engagements, fighting for tree lines, fighting for a height, fighting for a corner of a village, and you amass the force necessary with the supporting arms to take that piece of land, and then what happened immediately is the other side counterattacks, and if they counterattack with sufficient support, they push you back. And so you were basically having this seesawing operation taking place, and no movement on the battlefield. What Russia was doing was creating the conditions there where they were killing more Ukrainians than the Ukrainians were killing Russians, but still the battlefield didn't move very much because Ukraine had sufficient manpower. Again, I just want to point out that, according to Zelensky, Ukraine has about 880,000 men under arms. Now, he made that statement about a month ago, and given the casualty rate, say 40, 50,000, I'd say that they have 830,000 men under arms today. And next month, they'll have 780,000 men under arms. And then the next month, they'll have 720,000 men under arms because they're not getting any more manpower. They're losing stuff. And now you realize, while that's a large number of men, they've got to man a huge frontage, and they've got to protect against a potential incursion from Belarus, and they have to screen off the Transnistria region, and suddenly that's not a lot of men anymore. And the more casualties you suffer, the thinner your lines get, and you don't have the forces necessary to do these counterattacks. So what's happening right now, and it's happening right now as we speak, Russia's continuing the same intensity. They're taking this tree line, they're taking this city block, they're taking this height as they did in the past. But this time the Ukrainians aren't counterattacking because they can't. So Russia now holds this land. And then the next day, they take another tree line. They take another city block. They take another height. Every day, 500 meters, 1.5 kilometers. It's not huge. These aren't 20-kilometer thrusts. These are just little chunks. But the Ukrainians can't counterattack. They can't hold. And the thing about that positional warfare is because the defenses are done in depth, as you penetrate a defensive line, you get stopped and then you get pushed back to your line. So the front never changed. Russia's now breaking through the Ukrainian defenses, and there's no coherent defense behind. And so the Russian, instead of going tree line, the reason why you go tree line is that you have defenses able to, provide, supporting fire, crossfires, et cetera. So you can't bite off too much or else you're going to get hit on flanking fires. There's no more artillery. The drones don't fly for the Ukrainians well anymore because Russia has been killing the drone operators, and Russia's just biting off these big chunks. Adviivka is falling because Russia is able to make big incursions into the city, and there's nobody to counterattack. There's no counterattacking force. The defenders there are dying. You can't even rotate them out. They've run out of ammunition. They're hungry. They're wounded. And nobody's relieving them. This is the reality of the battlefield throughout the front. It's happening everywhere. I would ask people to go back and study a World War II battle. It's called the Collapse of Army Group Center. Took place in the summer of 1944. German Army Group Center, huge group of forces defending the central front on the Eastern Front. And the Russians launched a counterattack or launched an attack. And the Germans, of course, very effective defenders are starting to defend, but they didn't have the troops to counterattack, to push back. And eventually the Russians broke them down and the front just collapsed. And that's what we're getting to right now. And you hear the panic in everybody's voice because everybody sees it in the West. They're going, holy cow, the Ukrainians are becoming so thin that the Russians are going to come through and there's going to be nothing left to stop them. And at that point in time, Russia pushes up the Dnieper River. Remember Vladimir Putin's his speech about history. The left bank is Russia, and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and many have made predictions that 2025, I believe there's a goal on the Russian side that 2025, this will have been resolved in some form or another. Do you feel like that's the case? Yeah, I'm wondering your thoughts about that because on the one hand, you have Russia obviously in this commanding position on the battlefield and also in all sorts of other areas that we have covered here, economically, politically, in terms of its legitimacy. All of this, even its narrative now around Ukraine is widespread, agreed with, or at least validated by most of the world. But at the same time, you still have the United States, you still have NATO, while they have cooled on maybe the official position on Ukraine that they began with and ran with. At the same time, they're not ones to retreat from conflicts unless they're literally running out, like in Afghanistan, where they're literally having to run out with the tails between their legs because they're being chased.
But NATO's never been confronted by a force that they've done there. Look, again, I don't speak for the Russian government. I'm not, despite what people might say, I'm not part of the Russian government. But I have spoken to senior leaders, military and civilian alike, and basically the feeling is that something very major, that the war will enter a completely new phase sometime in May of this year. And I think that what they're talking about is the collapse. And that between May and September, the Russians will make very huge advances, seizing Odessa, Mykolaiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, and that by September, October, this thing's over. Now, what the 2025 figure comes into where Russia is budgeted. Um, because Russia, I think, expects that the demilitarization will be accomplished by September of this year. Um, but then you have the issue of denazification, the political aspect of it. And so you have to continue to fund. Plus, Russia has to take into account NATO's overreaction. Not that NATO will get involved, but I can guarantee that with this collapse comes um, NATO panicking and insisting that they get 300,000 troops up on the Polish border, and that can't happen in a vacuum. So Russia has budgeted for continued military buildup to counter that. But at some point in time, the defeat of Ukraine will be absolute, and the West will have to learn to live with this defeat, with this outcome. It will be sort of the European version of Afghanistan, where at the end of the day, there's nothing they can do. There's literally nothing they can do to change this outcome. Ukraine is being defeated. Ukraine is being destroyed. The NATO gambit has failed. And now NATO will have to fall back and figure out what they're going to do about it. And this is where, Russian diplomacy comes into mind, because right now NATO's talking about, Russia talking moving on to Poland, threatening the Baltics. Russia's not going to do any of that. I mean, Russia's not going to sit there and pretend that the Baltics aren't being idiots. They're not going to sit there and pretend that Finland isn't being suicidal and all that, but they're not going to attack Finland. They're not going to attack the Baltics. They're not going to attack Poland. They're not going to attack Romania. What Russia wants to do is bring stability to Europe along the lines of what they proposed back in December of 2021. You remember those two draft treaties, one to NATO, one to the United States, about a new European security framework? Well, you're starting to hear a lot of people in Europe saying, "Hey, that's not a bad discussion to have with the Russians right now." And I think, for instance, Germany, you've got the inherently contradictory postures of Admiral Bauer, the head of the military commission or whatever he is, German, talking about, we have to prepare for war with Russia, the imminence of war with Russia. Within 20 years, he talks about it. Within 20 years, dude, you're not going to be alive in 20 years. You don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. It shows you the stupidity of that. But the point is, let's say he said within 2 years. How is Germany going to do that? They're deindustrializing as we speak. Their industries are collapsing. They're fleeing the country. Their economy is shrinking, and so in all of this, and it's bringing about social reaction. The German farmers are in a near revolutionary state right now to bring down the German government, and in this, you suddenly have this lone admiral who's gone insane talking about war. We have to rebuild. We have to build a new German army. With patriotic Germans. There are no patriotic Germans, dude. They don't care. They don't share your fantasy. There's Germans aren't running around with the German flag on their shoulder anymore. They're not signing up to join your army or your navy or your air force. So now he's talking about the German people have to prepare for war. You need water and food and radios and batteries and all. And the German people are going, dude, we just want an economy that works. And so I think you're going to see Europe, all of Europe, undergo this transition where the political and economic elite that got them into this position where their economies are collectively collapsing are going to be pushed out of the way, and a new political and economic elite is going to emerge. And I think you're going to see sanity prevail. I mean, what's Germany's quickest route to the restoration of their economy? Cheap Russian gas. Boom. And I think that's the direction you're heading. So I think Russia's going to exploit that. I do believe that there's maneuver room in the next 5 to 10 years for Russia and Europe to get their act together to, denuclearize. I mean, get those American bombs out of Europe. Don't let bombs go into Poland. Try and stop the bombs going into England. Russia can withdraw their nuclear weapons from Belarus. Maybe a new conventional forces in Europe thing where they start bringing down, because it's to NATO's advantage. Why spend $300 billion to build up a military that will never be able to stand toe to toe with the Russians, meaning, attacking Russia? Russia's never going to attack NATO. But so I think sanity will prevail. And I think that's the posture that Russia's taking. But What Russia can't do is a half measure. What I mean is everything I just talked about, sanity prevailing, is predicated upon a decisive Russian victory. Europe has to be presented with a reality, a non-negotiable reality. What you see with all of these wishful thinking musings in the media is, for instance, a lot of people are saying we want a stalemate. Well, what's a stalemate? That creates a 38th parallel situation, like the Korean conflict, a frozen conflict, which means that Ukraine, as it currently exists, still exists. This entity called Ukraine, which is a cancer to Russia, still exists. That NATO will flow in weapons by freezing the conflict. Some in NATO believe at that point in time, NATO troops can come into Ukraine and create a de facto reality of a NATO, of Ukraine being a NATO member with Article 5 protections of this nature. Russia will never allow that. Russia will never allow a frozen conflict, a 38th parallel. This is fantasy. Russia has to solve the Ukrainian problem once and for all. And that means literally the destruction of the modern Ukrainian state as it's currently configured. The absolute elimination of Banderist ideology, this ultranationalism that exists, Ukrainian ultranationalism, has to be purged. It can't be allowed to exist inside Ukraine. It really can't. And Russia has to convince the West to not allow it to exist in diaspora. That's going to be a tough sell in the United States and Canada, but I do think you can get other nations to agree that Banderist ideology should go to the way of, Hitler's Nazi ideology, meaning it should be widely recognized as being evil in nature, destructive to European values, and shouldn't be allowed to exist on European soil. But this can only happen if Russia wins the war decisively. And Russia's on the path of accomplishing this. I mean, literally, this is the inevitable outcome, unless Putin suddenly has a stroke and decides to negotiate away. That's why Putin will never negotiate. That's why the Russians will never negotiate, not the way the Western Zelensky wants, because Russia knows it has to have a decisive victory. Russia knows the following: that Crimea will never be secure as long as the Ukrainians control Odessa. And you can thank Great Britain for this. You can thank the British who went in and said it would be very clever for us to build these underwater drones to give the Ukrainians Storm Shadow missiles and to use Odessa as a launching pad to attack the Crimean Peninsula, to attack Feodosia, to attack Sevastopol. You got some you got some PR moments. Oh, boom, you blew up the bridge. Oh, boom, you blew up a boat. Oh, boom. Well, what you did, England, is you cost Ukraine Odessa and the Black Sea coast. You ensured that the future Ukraine will be nothing but an agricultural rump state, landlocked, because you decided to score stupid tactical points without thinking about the larger strategic picture. So England has cost Ukraine Odessa, and if Russia's taken Odessa, it's taken Mykolaiv. End of story. You can't have Odessa without Mykolaiv. And if you're taking Mykolaiv, you have to take the rest of the left bank of the Dnieper, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kharkov. It's over. That's what's going to happen. There's nothing going to change that, and that's the reality the West is going to have to learn to deal with.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.